At 5:55 p.m. on June 29, 1995, one of Seoul's most luxurious department stores collapsed. Within seconds, 5 floors came down, killing 502 people. But the warning signs had appeared hours earlier. The 5th floor was cracking. Concrete around the supporting column was sinking. Restaurants were closed, specialists were called, and senior executives discussed the damage. Still, the store remained open. Customers continued shopping, employees stayed at their counters. The question was no longer why the building collapsed. It was why hundreds of people were still inside when it did. In the late 80s, Seoul was changing at extraordinary speed. Only a generation earlier, South Korea had been devastated by war and widespread poverty. Over the following decades, its economy expanded rapidly. Factories opened, exports increased, new highways crossed the country, and apartment towers reshaped the capital. By the time Seoul hosted the 1988 Summer Olympics, South Korea was presenting itself as a modern industrial power. Much of that new prosperity was visible south of the Han River. Gangnam had once contained large areas of farmland. By the 80s, it was becoming one of the most desirable parts of Seoul. Wealthy families moved into new apartment complexes. Businesses followed. Shopping centers, schools, and office buildings appeared across districts that had barely existed a few decades earlier. In Seoul, on the western side of Gangnam, the Sampoong Department Store opened in late 1989. Its pink exterior stood beside a busy residential area. Inside were several floors of clothing stores, luxury boutiques, restaurants, and cultural facilities with a supermarket below ground. Sampoong was aimed at customers benefiting from South Korea's new wealth. Imported clothing, cosmetics, jewelry, and expensive household goods filled its sales floors. Thousands of people entered the store to shop, eat, or meet friends. To them, Sampoong looked permanent. Its columns were concealed behind polished walls and decorative panels. The concrete slabs supporting each floor disappeared about suspended ceilings, lights, and carefully arranged displays. To the customers moving between boutiques and restaurants, Sampoong appeared solid, modern, and permanent. Nothing inside the store suggested that its safety had already been compromised. But behind those finished surfaces, the building no longer fully matched the structure that had originally been planned. During construction, openings were cut through the floor slabs to make room for escalators. An additional 5th floor, initially intended to contain an indoor roller skating rink, was later converted into a group of traditional Korean restaurants. That was not a minor change. A skating rink would have required a largely open floor. The restaurants needed kitchens, heavy equipment, partition walls, and thick heated floors known as ondo. Layers of concrete and heating pipes were added beneath the dining areas, substantially increasing the permanent weight carried by the structure. Heavy air conditioning equipment was later installed on the roof above them. Each alteration either added weight or reduced the building's remaining margin for error. For years, none of this was visible from the sales floors below. The store remained crowded, profitable, and outwardly stable. When inside the concrete, the additional loads were being carried by a structure that had never been properly strengthened to support them. Eventually, the first signs began to appear. To understand why these changes mattered, it helps to understand how Sampoong supported its floors. The building did not use large beams beneath each level. Instead, the concrete floor slabs rested directly on rows of columns. This design created the wide, open spaces needed for a department store. There were fewer walls and supports blocking the sales areas, making it easier to arrange shops, displays, and escalators. But it also made the points where the floors met the columns especially important. Each column supported a section of the concrete slab above it. If the concrete around that connection became too weak, the slab could break away and drop around the column. The weight it had been carrying would then shift onto the surrounding columns. Those supports would suddenly be asked to carry far more than before. If one of them also failed, the same process could repeat, allowing the collapse to spread from one part of the floor to another. For a long time, they continued to hold, but their time was running out. Employees had reported cracks, water leaks, and occasional vibrations inside the building. Some accounts suggest that visible damage had been developing for weeks, although the exact timeline remains uncertain. On the morning of June 29th, the warning became impossible to ignore. At approximately 8 a.m., workers in a fifth-floor restaurant found a large crack near a supporting column. The floor around it had begun to sink. As the damage worsened, restaurants in the affected area were closed. The air conditioning system was reportedly switched off because its vibration appeared to be increasing the moment, but the rest of the department store continued operating. On the floors below, employees stocked shelves and worked behind sales counters. Customers entered the underground supermarket and moved through the building as they would on any other day. Most had no idea that part of the floor above them was visibly deforming. Specialists were called to inspect the damage. Accounts differ over exactly what they told management, but their visit was followed by an emergency meeting among senior Sampoong officials. Closing the building was discussed. No general evacuation order was given. Revenue has often been cited as the reason the store remained open. Whatever was said inside the meeting, the decision made afterward is clear. The damaged restaurants were closed while the rest of the building remained full. By late afternoon, almost 10 hours had passed since the major crack was first reported. At around 5:40, employees heard loud cracking sounds from the upper floors. Parts of the ceiling began to shift, and the slab around one column was losing its support. There was still no building-wide warning. The people inside were now less than 20 minutes from collapse. At approximately 5:55 p.m., sections of the fifth-floor ceiling began to fall. Witnesses heard sharp cracks followed by heavy impacts moving through the building. Then the concrete slab around one of the supporting columns gave away. The column itself did not suddenly break. Instead, the weakened floor failed around the point where it rested on the column. The weight carried there shifted onto the supports nearby. Those connections were already under severe stress. One failed, then another. The failure spread across the fifth floor. Restaurant equipment, walls, and rooftop machinery fell with it. When the upper floor struck the level below, that floor also gave way. Each falling slab added more weight, driving the collapse downward through the sales areas, storage spaces, and underground levels. Much of Sampoong's north wing disappeared in less than 20 seconds. From the street, witnesses watched the center of the pink building fold inward as a dense cloud of dust spread across the surrounding roads. Inside, employees and shoppers had almost no time to react. Some escaped through stairways or areas near the outer walls. Others survived because falling slabs became lodged against furniture, machinery, or stronger parts of the structure, creating narrow pockets inside the wreckage. Hundreds were trapped beneath concrete and twisted steel. The Sampoong Department Store had been open for less than 6 years, and most of it disappeared in seconds. Firefighters, police officers, soldiers, medical teams, and volunteers began arriving within minutes. The ruins were still dangerous. Large sections remained standing, fires burned underground, and rescuers did not know which parts might fall next. Teams climbed over unstable slabs, called into gaps, and stopped repeatedly to listen for voices beneath the concrete. Families gathered around the site and outside nearby hospitals. Lists of injured patients and photographs of unidentified survivors were posted on walls. Relatives moved between emergency rooms and ruins, often unable to learn whether someone was injured, missing, or dead. Rescuers faced another problem. Heavy machinery could remove debris quickly, but it could also crush the small spaces protecting anyone still alive. Working by hand was safer, but painfully slow. Approximately 52 hours after the collapse, rescuers heard voices from a basement dressing room. 24 people, most of them cleaning workers, had survived, together inside a section that remained partly intact. To reach them, teams opened a narrow passage through the rubble. In places, it was barely wide enough for one person. The survivors were coated with vegetable oil and liquid soap, so they could be pulled through its tightest sections. One by one, all 24 were brought out alive. Their rescue showed that protected spaces still existed beneath the collapsed floors. But as the operation continued, more bodies were recovered and the chance of finding additional survivors appeared to fall. Then, more than 9 days after the building collapsed, rescuers heard another voice. 21-year-old Choi Myung-suk was found inside a small cavity beneath the rubble. He had eaten nothing and was too weak to stand. Water seeping through the wreckage had helped keep him alive. Nearly 12 days after the collapse, 19-year-old sales clerk Yo Ji-hwan was also brought out alive. And on July 15th, 16 days after the Sampoong fell, rescuers found another 19-year-old sales clerk, Park Seong-kyu. She had spent more than 2 weeks in darkness. As she was carried outside, rescuers covered her eyes to protect them from daylight and camera flashes. She was weak and severely dehydrated, but she was alive. Park became the final survivor recovered from the ruins. By the end of the operation, 502 people had been confirmed dead and 937 injured. Among the victims were employees who had continued working because no general evacuation order had ever been given. When engineers examined the ruins, they found that the 5th floor cracks had been only the final warning. Investigators compared construction drawings with the finished building and tested samples of concrete and reinforcing steel. The differences were substantial. Columns supporting the 5th floor and roof were supposed to be approximately 80 centimeters in diameter. Some had been built at around 60. The concrete in parts of the building was weaker than required. In critical areas, the reinforced depth of the slabs was also smaller than planned, while steel bars had been placed too low inside the concrete. That made the floors especially vulnerable where they met the columns. At the same time, converting the 5th floor into restaurants had increased its permanent load by roughly 35%, without properly strengthening the structure below. These defects did not act separately. The building was carrying additional weight on smaller columns, weaker concrete, and less resistant floor slabs. When the slab failed near column 5E, the load shifted onto surrounding supports. One connection failed, then the next, allowing the collapse to spread. But the physical evidence was only part of the case. Construction records showed that parts of the completed department store did not match the approved plans. Alterations had been accepted after the work was finished, and officials responsible for enforcing building regulations had received bribes connected to those approvals. The investigation was no longer only about structural failure. It became a criminal case involving Sampoong's owners, construction personnel, and public officials. The store had not collapsed because of one mistake. Its safety had been reduced during design, construction, alteration, inspection, and daily operation. And when the final warning appeared, management still did not order the people inside to leave. The first verdicts were delivered in December 1995. 25 people were persecuted, including Sampoong's executives, construction specialists, and public officials responsible for approving or inspecting the building. No one was accused of intentionally killing the victims. The case focused on professional negligence, unauthorized construction changes, and bribery. Prosecutors argued that management had approved dangerous alterations, allowed the store to remain open despite structural warnings, and used bribes to secure approval for changes that violated building regulations. Company chairman Lee John initially received 10 years and 6 months in prison. His son, company president Lee Han-sang, received 7 years. Architects, engineers, construction personnel, and officials who had accepted bribes also received prison terms or suspended sentences, depending on their roles. After an appeal, Lee Jones' sentence was reduced to 7 years and 6 months. Lee Han-sang's sentence remained unchanged. In August 1996, South Korea's Supreme Court upheld Lee Jones' reduced sentence. The courts concluded that unauthorized design changes, defective construction, and failures in management had all contributed to the collapse. Responsibility extended beyond the owners to the specialists and officials who had allowed the violations to continue. For many victims' families, the sentence remained painfully short. The longest final prison term given to a Sampoong executive was 7 years and 6 months. 502 people had been killed. Every person convicted would eventually leave prison. For the families of the victims, the consequences had no comparable end date. The collapse forced South Korea to confront failures extending far beyond one department store. On July 18, 1995, less than 3 weeks after the disaster, the government enacted a National Disaster Management Act. It created a broader legal framework for major man-made disasters and required local authorities to establish clearer systems for emergency planning, coordination, and command. Authorities also ordered inspections of buildings across Seoul. Serious defects were found in other structures, reinforcing fears that Sampoong had not been an isolated case. The collapse had exposed wider weaknesses in construction standards, inspection, and enforcement during South Korea's rapid development. The department store was never rebuilt. After the ruins were cleared, the former site was redeveloped into a residential complex. In 1998, a memorial bearing the names of the 502 victims was completed in what is now Mahon Citizens Forest, several kilometers from where the building once stood. Memorial services continue to be held there. The Sampoong collapse did more than expose the failures of one company. It forced South Korea to question how the country had been built. For decades, new bridges, apartment complexes, offices, and shopping centers had represented national progress. That growth had transformed South Korea into an industrial power. But Sampoong showed what could remain hidden behind a modern exterior. A building could open without matching its approved design. An inspection could be passed without proving that the structure was safe. Dangerous changes could be accepted because the people responsible for stopping them had been ignored, influenced, or paid. After Sampoong, building safety could no longer be treated only as a private matter between developers, contractors, and local officials. The government expanded inspections, created a national framework for civilian disasters, and required clearer systems for coordinating emergency response. Those reforms could not restore the lives lost inside the store, and they did not guarantee that corruption or negligence would disappear. But Sampoong changed the questions asked after later disasters. Had the warnings been reported? Did the building match its approved plans? Who had the authority to order an evacuation, and who would be responsible when that authority was not used? At Sampoong, every safeguard failed in sequence. The plans were altered, construction defects passed inspection, additional weight was added, officials accepted violations, management ignored visible signs of failure. And on the final day, when there was still time to empty the store, the people inside were not told to leave. No single decision brought the department store down, but each decision removed another opportunity to prevent the disaster. By 5:55 p.m., the building could no longer be saved, and the people inside still could have been. And that is why Sampoong remains more than one of South Korea's deadliest peacetime disasters. It became a national lesson about what happens when economic progress moves faster than the institutions responsible for protecting human life. For more carefully researched stories about crime, corruption, and the events that shaped East Asia, subscribe to East Crime Chronicles. Thank you for watching.